And we're live with the Smart Museum and MacArthur Fellows for special programming on Lumpen Radio. Here's Abby.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm super glad to be here with Emmanuel Pratt, Executive Director and co-founder of Sweetwater Foundation, and artists Mel Chin and Iñigo Manglano-Ovalle. Super excited to discuss their respective projects and their collaboration for Towards Common Cause, Art, Social Change, and the MacArthur Fellows Program at 40. But we can't begin this conversation, of course, without acknowledging the current state of civil unrest. We want to say that we're all deeply saddened and outraged by the unconscionable acts of racial aggression and police brutality that have occurred across the country in the past several weeks. Sadly, these are the latest offensive in over 400 years of racial injustice. And we very much hope that this dialogue and those surrounding these artworks will facilitate debate and exchange, raise awareness of, and ultimately spur action to confront the systemic racism and staggering inequities that plague our society. And with that, I'm going to ask the gentlemen to introduce themselves, and maybe we can start in the order that I introduced them. So, Emmanuel, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm Emmanuel Pratt. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Sweetwater Foundation. Our tagline is "There Grows the Neighborhood," pun intended, because we're actually offering what a lot of people are orienting as a solutionary approach towards the challenges of Publix, the challenges of systemic racism, redlining. We're operating in the south side of Chicago. We have 4 contiguous city blocks that are historically redline sites, but it's a fusion between gardening, farming, carpentry, apprenticeship program, art, public art, education. And in a nutshell, we have, a new story. And so we've got housing, we've got the first timber frame barn in the city of Chicago since the fire. Most of our public installations are more like urban acupuncture. We identify a stress point and we respond to it and allow for space for biofeedback and try our best to create a safe place.
Mel Chin, you're up.
Okay. Well, I always like to describe myself as a conceptual artist, but maybe I'm a recovering conceptual artist. There are many steps. I think what I mean by that is that I'm always going under some kind of transformation by the conditions that exist and confront me. So you're actually no longer inspired by conditions, but your reality, your social reality, your internal reality. You're kind of compelled into action. And I think that's been the case for many, many years now. The project that we're doing in Chicago is actually national, and that project was started about 10 years ago, dealing with the invisible nature, similar like COVID, and quite to the contrary, very visible systemic racism how it's manifested for all those 400 years you've been describing. But we were looking at a post-Katrina world back then, 12 years ago, it seems, about a city that was trying to rebuild with all this enthusiasm. And then I discovered that 30 to 50% of the inner city childhood population of New Orleans were poisoned with lead in their blood, basically. And there was no recourse, there's no support, there's no action dedicated toward that. So immediately, rather than doing a project on a personal level, it was how can we do a we project? How can you have a child, basically, or a grandmother for that matter, respond and have a voice that was meaningful? So it took the form of citizens, young children, as well as elders, to draw their own version of a $100 bill. And we would collect that as this project called the Fundred. And the Fundred project would eventually deliver it and ask for that value of the human expression, the human voice, to be put up against a possible solution. Take it to DC, was the reality back then. It has evolved. It has evolved not just to be about New Orleans, but about every place in America, essentially, that we found this to be a pervasive problem, usually within disenfranchised neighborhoods. So we had collected about 500,000 drawings, and we're presenting it to a major museum collection when this call to have a common cause from Chicago came in. And we decided to resurrect it or just keep it going one more time for a project we call A Bill for Ill, and it's like Funded 2.0 because something that always has been on all our mind. We're a collective. We're going under the banner now, Source Studio, and we felt that we had to do it in Chicago because it was one of the places that I was keenly aware of that had huge amounts of childhood-lead poisoning of children now growing into young adults. And I was compelled again to return to come to Chicago for the purpose of getting this project going. So I'm glad I did because we want to maintain the activism necessary. So we can only move from being an artist, maybe being artists that are part of this, to just being delivery people of voices of millions of people so that it can influence a policy, perhaps an act of Congress to deal with this. So it's time. It's time. And it's a terrible time out there right now. And I see relationships with the problem of lead, racism, environmental injustice, all this collectively. And so we have to maintain and continue the project. So we've never been more committed. So is that what I was supposed to do? Introduce the project or myself?
Both.
Sorry. Okay.
I think you did a good job.
My brother.
My name is Iñigo Manglano-Ovalle. I also think of myself and describe myself as a conceptual artist who delves into notions of the public sphere and co-authorship with others inside and outside of art. And I was approached by Abby a couple years ago and about this project that MacArthur was doing, exhibiting the work of a number of MacArthur Fellows. And she wanted to come to the studio. You wanted to come to the studio, Abby, and discuss, make a presentation about a project that they wanted me to do. And so before that happened, I kind of spent some time thinking about what I would want to do. And I thought, well, there's this project that I had just recently done called Well, an earthwork, a public project that was in many ways simply installing a sculpture in the form of a manual well that would tap an aquifer and have the public bring up water, have free access to water. And that project was installed together with Site Santa Fe, about outside of Santa Fe, north of Santa Fe in the Santa Clara Pueblo Nation. And I was thinking before Abby showed up, I was going, well, is there any way I could convince Abby and the folks at MacArthur that are putting this together to do a well or some wells in the city of Chicago? And Abby arrived to my studio and then immediately started to give a presentation about what they would prefer, and it was the same project. It was a well project, so I was enthusiastic from the get-go. And so, yeah, that's what started a conversation, over a year and a half ago. And that's what we're hoping of doing.
It's actually almost precisely 2 years ago, almost to the day that we had that conversation about a well. And, I brought both of you. I have a habit now of taking folks to Sweetwater. Because the Smart has has a long history of working with Sweetwater, but also because when I have some of my more outlandish ideas, like we should dig a well in the city of Chicago, and I'm trying to think of somebody who would embark upon that kind of journey with me. I know Emmanuel may be game, so I always show up at Sweetwater with things that seem slightly difficult. So I wonder, Emmanuel, if you want to, I mean, I love to hear all three of you talk about, why this seems like a good fit. Because essentially what we're talking about, right, are two sculptural interventions that both focus on environmental justice. And both of them are also, thinking about environmental justice and kind of public health and access to resources, which in the current crisis that we find ourselves in, and the crisis that was precipitated by coronavirus, right? The link between racism and public health and environmental justice have, that the three of you have been concerned about for some time, have, been thrown into stark relief. So I wonder if you want to talk about that a little bit, or why the three of you working together seemed reasonable to you when I proposed it.
So at first, when you proposed it, I was like, what? And then we didn't have our relationship yet. We just had the interface through the SMART. And there's a bond that grew, a very unconventional, non-traditional bond that grew between my organization and the SMART Museum that is affiliated with an institution that has a history of not the best relations with its neighbors, particularly in the South Side of Chicago. And what's interesting is our unique alignment with the SMART around the concept of an installation called Radical Reconstructions was where we introduced the notion of we the publics. And so in this installation we did at the Threshold Gallery between two others that told the story of a new narrative of a formerly abandoned house, and created a common structure, a sculptural bench, and this interesting facade on the wall that became almost more like a set design. That was where our partnership with SMART began, and a very unconventional art installation that engaged a multiplicity of publics through different mediums. That also shifted the narrative between the farmer and then moved back towards my background was architecture and engagement in urban design. So that was the interesting thing, because that was where we started that partnership, and that was where the beginning relationship started to form, and no one knew what pathway that was going to lead to. And that allowed for us to begin to meet and connect and then have these types of conversations of new beginnings and new normals that are desperately, utterly needed, because the old, antiquated ways of externalities that render everything invisible, such as the lead in the soil, the lead in the water, the air quality being contaminated, the holes, the benign neglect and municipal disinvestment in our cities that are coincidentally redlined, over-policed, all of the other stuff that any epidemiologist would tell you, oh yeah, COVID's going to strike hardest in those neighborhoods, which is my neighborhood, right? We know this. Implicitly, we know it explicitly, but we're also silenced. So part of the approach that we've taken is a regenerative neighborhood development, R&D. So with the concept of we the publics, we've said, well, let's take the holes where there used to be one of the worst schools in the history of Chicago. Now stands a farm, a barn, a space for art and engagement and public performances, and a space for questionings, a space for thinking, a space for reflection and healing. Across the street, we have a garden that's open to the public. Everyone is this, while it might just look like a garden, it's actually a space that we conceptualize for a connection, a reconnection, and a space for questions, to bridge the gap for generations, like reconnect the generation now to the generation of elders. Ask questions like, what is water for as a source of life? And if you contaminate the water and you contaminate the food, what is a food desert? That's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. That's created. That's a choice of investment and disinvestment. That's a choice to erase certain populations and housings. So Point being, framing we the publics and radical reconstruction. And we have the Reconstruction House and the Learning Tree and the R&D Park. We just started naming stuff where we put new installations because why do we call it vacant lots anymore? Why don't we call it public space? It's been empty for 20 plus years. The infrastructure is hollowed out. We don't have certain types of hydrants. We don't know the status of all of the water in the area. We do know that there's a heightened issue of lead in all of our neighborhoods. So again, when you introduced Mel and Iñigo to us, we're kind of like, yeah, this makes sense. We have no idea, but it makes sense. New installations that could be almost, again, continuations of this extension of an urban acupuncture, identify a stress point, chart the territory to make it uncharted, to then explore, ask the right questions, convene people to get together the voices to amplify. So in this era where we're supposedly quarantined, and then these acts of explicit violence that have been happening over and over and over and over and over and over, and I'm gonna keep doing it, and over and over and over and over, that are, to us, we bear the weight of them, but now people are starting to understand these undeniable truths. We look forward to this opportunity to convene and think and dream of new ways and new solutions to ask the right questions on new ways forward. So when you say, hey, I want to do a safe house, of course, we got a church right around the corner, a historical African-American church that no one knows the history of because it was like erased from the history books. But it's a shell of a monument that we would love to start fresh with the Fundred and the safe house. Of course, the public park that we put an installation called the meeting house, because we need to have a space to meet. Why have a vacant lot? Of course, that would be a perfect place to start questioning issues of water and contamination and what are new ways forward. There's accountability frameworks, and I think I've spoken enough on this, but creating new frameworks for accountability, because clearly we have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I remember, Emmanuel, I remember when I first came down to see it, first thing you do is when you arrive at Sweetwater is you take it in. As you're arriving to Sweetwater, you're seeing a historically redlined neighborhood that is not populated by small vacant zones, but actually has been depopulated, emptied out, and then you arrive to Sweetwater, and you see a farm.
life.
You see an incredible structure, and you see people working. You see a garden, but you also see a farm. You see houses, a number of houses that have been built. You see a workshop. You see an infrastructure that's being created, there by Sweetwater, by the community. And so when I arrived to be introduced to see Sweetwater as a possible site, it made sense on a very basic level. It made sense that Sweetwater had taken emptiness and dirt and made it into full enriched soil, just on a very basic level. That's what hits you when you arrive. Once you stick around Sweetwater, you realize that it's much more than an urban farm, much more than a farm. It's actually a network of a number of different approaches towards issues of social justice and environmental justice. And I don't know, I think that before we started actually planning and discussing where a well might go, right?
You started to work and play together first.
Right. We started to sort of say, well, Mel, maybe I'd like to get to know you better and the group better by actually picking up a hammer and working with you. So weekly, I would work with master carpenters like Mike and Rudy, and with architects Sam and Andy and with the group. And I was enthralled by a meeting that was had at Sweetwater over the discussion of the design of stop signs that Sweetwater was going to put up where stop signs were needed, used to belong, and were taken down by the city. And it turned out that that discussion over the design of the stop sign was a larger group discussion, even though the artist was there. And so immediately I realized this is excellent, because once we start talking about the well,
Yep.
it's going to be a large discussion. This is a place where authorship and ownership of a thing that we might call art is brought into question, And so immediately I felt this is a place that can even problematize my practice. Emmanuel and I have been discussing and wanting to discern new definitions of what public means, new definitions of what access means, new definitions of what authorship means, new definitions of what ownership means. And not only for an artwork or for an artist, but in the public at large, in language at large.
Well, so interesting about our connection also is just thematically just water. Water is a source of life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really unpack that, water is a source of life, or lack of access to the right water as a negation of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or the invisibility of infrastructure that allows for us to get water to support life.
Mm-hmm.
Or contaminations of water that go invisible, that actually affect the neuroplasticity and how your brains work and don't work, and how you can learn and don't learn, and the fact that we don't have food in some of the schools that are 2 blocks away from us. So it's a much. So the conceptual framework of a well and diving deep to get to that source.
And making visible what is hidden, right? And making accessible what is removed, from you. And then there's the aspect of sharing, right? The notion that water from the well, right? What to do with that, and what to do with that water, and who has access to that. And the notion of being able
and accountability, though, because there's too much of a passivity on both sides, on all sides. It's just like, we got to hold stuff accountable, but we also can be proactive on what to do about things. There are ways to test. There are ways to raise and amplify your voice. But people just don't know what to do, or they don't know how to look. It's been stripped away. It's like a forced amnesia, right? The redlining is an active process over generations of forced amnesia. And what's interesting about water, to me also, this came back to me, is like, water carries memory. Like, there's actually a thing. Water memory is a thing. Most people don't think about that. Like, water, the framework of what I appreciated so much about the proposition of the well is it just immediately starts to ask a lot of fundamental basic questions, day-to-day questions, but also geological questions, ecological questions, urban ecological questions. And so it was the object of the well as a structural object is the same to me as an object. Like, we did a stop sign as an art project that is right next to where a hydrant used to be. And people were like, wait, hold on. I think I remember. Wasn't there something here? Or there should be something here. And just the prompt initiates the conversation, and it becomes an emergent collaboration. And again, it's uncharted waters, and we're all exploring it, right? And Iñigo, we're all exploring it. We don't know where it goes. But
I think that my project and Mel's project, I'll let Mel speak to it, but our projects to a certain extent are, in a sense, levers that just open up a series of questions. You described it as a tool. Yeah. And in the well, actually, there is a lever. You have to push a handle up and down, and that lever action brings up the water. But the project as a whole, what it does is it brings up a number of issues that have been submerged, and it draws those things up to the surface. The questions that need to be asked, that are about health, about access, about ownership. Yeah, I think in many ways the Safe House does the same thing.
Yeah.
It uses a piece of hardware to bring up a series of issues.
Well, it's iconic to represent the thing that everybody seems to be preoccupied with and always have been: money.
Yeah.
It has the visuality. It's about the cash and its value, and how all these decisions about who gets it, who has it, and who does not has been predicated on economics and the disparity that's ever increasing. So yeah, the Safe House is so important to house the cash of individuals, individually drawn money, that I think is just as valuable as anything that ever could be represented. And to deliver that to the place that makes the decision, that's supposed to represent the people who've drawn them, and to make decisions based on that capital is something we're deeply, deeply experimenting with. Could this art capital have that be the lever? Because it seems to be the lever for everything else, this cash. So it is. When I was told, to even deal with New Orleans problems, it might take $300 million. I said, well, I know it's impossible for me to raise that much as a person, but if there can be such of a collective we of millions of people, we can make that. We can make that. But then we have to deliver it in a proper way, in a respectful way, to influence the other kind of levers that are in our world. When I came to Sweetwater, by the way, man, I was nervous. I said, oh, shit, because I was thinking, what if he says no? I remember way back, just knowing my politics, Kissinger once said, the South does not matter. That just really disturbed me. And so South Central in LA or South Side Chicago, I said, these are the places that matter, And then when 2012 was kind of pivotal, because there's a New York Times article about 38% increase of homicides within Chicago. And I started looking into that. And I looked at the available resources are just real estate maps that show what they call the most dangerous areas of Chicago. And I knew where they were then. But then I found this other resource, because working on the Fundred project, was maps of childhood lead levels, blood lead levels back in 1990s, which would put those kids that were there in those neighborhoods about that age where all this things was happening. And they were so elevated, it's not a joke. So when you put those things together, you see this invisible kind of impact on the society that does matter, that was not being paid attention to. So how the mayor brought
the schools too.
Yeah, the mayor brought on all the gang control, law enforcement, all these things. And I sent that image over to them. They asked me, when am I coming up? I said, what do you mean? When I come? You have the maps. You have the information for years. When are you going to get it together, right? So I was so nervous because I said, if we're going to come to Chicago and do this, then we have to be in the South. No disrespect, Abigail, we're going to be in the museum and all that, but we have to be in the South in some way. So what we want to bring in is some representation that is powerful and meaningful, but in the end, it is the representation of every individual that draws a Fundred, that wants to be represented in this other battle, because I think we have to bring it all together. The voices must be respected in all kinds of ways. So. So it's exciting that we hit it off, Emmanuel. I mean, I'm just guessing, but you understood. What I love to meet people is that they understand what's going down as you're talking.
Yeah.
I felt that. And that beautiful post and beam barn. I'm here in the country, by the way, in Egypt Township, North Kakalaki, and we have a post and beam barn that we're working on. So it's a beautiful thing.
Cousins.
Yeah, cuz. Hey, yeah, we're all these cousins.
So Guys, we're getting questions from folks in the audience about reading lists and where they can get more information. I think both about the projects, but also about the issues that they raise. So if you want to mention some, you can. Although I think we're going to stop in a minute for station identification, but something to think about. And then, I think when we come back, we could talk about with both of your projects and this question of water, right? It's issues that people who have the luxury of not worrying about them don't worry about, right? But that people who are, forced with a decision between paying their utility bill and having their water turned off and putting food on the table have difficult questions, a much more intimate relationship with these things that most people take for granted as being taken care of them by the authorities that are supposed to take care of them, right? But which is in line with the ethos of Sweetwater, right? Which is a little bit about what you do when the sidewalk ends, right? Like infrastructural inequality has all sorts of connections that the vast majority of people don't ever pay attention to. But I'm going to leave it there, and then we can pick it up when we after we pause.
Thanks, Abby. This can be quick. You're listening to Lumpen Radio, 105.5 WLPN Chicago. You can hear us streaming at lumpenradio.com and on the Apple and Android apps. We're going to go back to a conversation between MacArthur Fellows Mel Chin, Iñigo Manglano-Ovalle, along with Emmanuel Pratt of Sweetwater Foundation and Abigail Winograd of the Smart Museum of Art. Thanks for listening. Back to you, Abby.
Also, Mel, I want to say that you don't have to apologize about slighting the museum. That's kind of the purpose of what we're doing, right? It's not just a question about access to all of these things that the projects touch on, but also access to contemporary art, and that shouldn't exclusively be the province of museums or traditional museum-going public. So there's no reason for public art to always be centrally located, right?
Great cause.
Yeah.
Or niece. She's my niece.
But I think that's an important issue that you bring up. I think that Emmanuel mentioned that at the very beginning, which is that his and Sweetwater's connection to the Smart Museum came about as an opening of the doors in order to bring into the museum some activity that was, in a sense, let's say, happening outside.
That's a polite way to say it as an active disruption.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, in a sense, I remember when I did street level video as a part of Culture in Action back in the early 90s. We made sure that we weren't just inviting a art public to the west side of Chicago, to Humboldt Park, where I lived and I did the work, right? But we also insisted that the museum, in a sense, bring an aspect of that project back into the center as well. Because otherwise you create the situation of creating a sort of kind of a passport that moves only in one direction when we talk about issues of a public art, as social art that deal with the margins, in which the center gets a passport to go out to the margins freely, but I always think it has to go both ways, that the presence has to be located in both sites, I
mean, the museums have been associated with white privilege. I mean, historic. I mean, it just is becoming a space of alienation for most of the audiences that we work with and serve. So most of the people that we worked with on our team had never stepped foot inside of a museum because it's not a space for them. It's not been a space. It was interesting that dynamic completely got disrupted in a positive way, both at the institutional level of the museum or its affiliations, because it's not the audience you typically see going in to do an installation. It's not an audience you typically see going in that is like perusing the work. But it was humanizing the space and humanizing our installation, but building foundations of human infrastructure relationships that created new pathways for new opportunities, for new beginnings and new stories. Our installation was only supposed to be in there. I think it was only supposed to be in there for like 6 months and ended up being there for over a year. Like, yeah, at least a year. Because it just found its roots there. It was interesting. It was really interesting, the results of the relationship from an art installation that actually genuinely, authentically said, we want to do something to give back. So it was interesting because like our installation, because like I said, it was more like a set design, and they had family days. And so we have family days. So we figured out, I was like, well, we're only 2.1 miles away, but you're literally worlds away. You're on the other side of Washington Park, we're in Inglewood, Washington Park. But there's no space for convening an interstitialities, if you will. How does that happen? And I think what I appreciate about the concept of commoning, the act of commoning, is the process of negotiating your differences. And it is messy. It is challenging. Somebody can slip up and say the wrong word, well-intended, and completely offend and violate. But then how do you resolve it and move forward collectively from that point? How do you learn to listen? How do you learn to understand? How do you learn to share? And then this is, again, once going back to this, that framework and the process of renegotiating our relationship with the museum and with the institution and with those networks that we traditionally would never have any reason to trust. Still don't, to a degree, right, at the greater scheme. But the humans that we know that are safeguard our partnership, our value-based partnership, we have grown to trust. And now we're offering and sharing space to do real, meaningful installations that will be living projects as an extension. And quite frankly, to me, they're more valuable than a lot of works that are housed simply on a wall, on a vertical surface that is valued almost similar to the diamond water paradox. If you don't know about that in economics, water is a source of life, but we don't know how to value it. But we'll overvalue a diamond all day, even though we know it's affiliated with all types of negative stuff. So there's a deeper issue of healing afoot. Also, it's interesting, the conversation before the break had me thinking about we're in such a state of psychosis currently in the world, particularly in the States, where you have an overwhelming amount of evidence of just the negation of life on video, no questions, and you want to just initially go to protect your valued spaces in real estate instead of actually get to the root causes of the issue. So now we've got folks that are drive-by in vehicles shooting at people that are just walking outside. So where is a safe space in the public now? We've got a virus that is invisible. We don't have access to tests. You don't know where to go to look. There's an invisibility of being that's like drowning us. So this collectivity and this partnership and collaboration becomes that much more important, and we do need more safe spaces and safe houses.
Well, the notion of the invisible infection, well, there's more. The other one is the disease of what we've been enduring in our culture. This is highly divisional culture, racism, and so that disease is this infection has been with us so long.
Yep. And
if anything, the intensity of it has been brought forward. It's been brought forward a lot, but with COVID on top of it, to imagine how we have to tackle two diseases at the same time now, and there's maybe more than that. And by the way, with the SMART, the whole idea was, if we make these fundraisers, will you show it as art so people who draw them can come there? Because to represent, to get over these kind of simple kind of dynamics of representation. But in the end, one key part of our association with Source and Fundred with the SMART is this idea that they're not afraid for advocacy or to lobby for the voice of these people united to put their voice in front of members of the Congress and the Senate who are acting on bills that have a direct implication on how they can deal with childhood-led poisoning. So it's like, I'm just saying that out loud so y'all can agree, Abigail, that y'all don't mind doing it, because a lot of nonprofits, working in the art field, if you get money from a nonprofit, they say, but you can't go there. You see, we won't support that because we have to be neutral. There's no, I think it's time to say, how can we be neutral now? It's time to let that go. We have to move, and it's all about action now. It's all about the action and
with respect to the action and the activation. There's another invisibility that is important to discuss in terms of activating, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about before the break around like just complicity or just feeling like you have no hand or say or no voice, and people don't know what to do. What's interesting about our collaboration with the SMART, but I think it will also very much trickle into, and fundamentally what Iñigo had pointed out was like we work together. Like we physically actually work with paid labor to make the installations collaboratively. So it's not us hiring external resources. It's a sharing of knowledge about what does it take in order to actually build and make the art. It's not let's just take the thing and plop it in place. There's a really, really interesting sharing of money and knowledge. And it's a visibility of a public that you don't see doing that work. But it's in the traditional in installations, there's this hidden component where the thing just kind of closes down and it appears, and it goes away, and then it goes ships and goes place. What I really like about our work and our collaborations is the value of work, rethinking the value of work. Because we have folks that we're feeding through food, but I don't worry about the money of the food. I actually want to make sure I can create local jobs that I can actually, in rethinking work. So Andre Gores has 2 X, and I got a bibliography of 400 plus deep that's too much to talk about here. But Andre Gores has 2 things: ecology is politics and reclaiming work beyond the wage-based society. And they partner very well with Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. And I think all of this is rethinking what is the scale of work and the scale that's appropriate for these art type of installations. It doesn't have to be monolithic. It actually should be small and personable.
Yeah. I want to go back to that issue of work, because it's going to take a lot of collaboration. There's going to be a lot of work putting in a well, building a safe house, and it's going to involve partnerships between the artist, the institution, and Sweetwater Foundation,
and with the city.
But then there's also the work that the public does. For example, in the well, so let's make a work that talks about access to water and the health, and provides healthy, clean water for people to consume and share. But the public has to do work. In other words, you have to pump that water out. I think that for me, that's implicit. In other words, that the work is incomplete until the public actually works to get the water. Right? They are connected on a physical level to completing that work, to getting access to that resource. So they are, in a sense, the engine of activation at the end point. What I, as an artist and Sweetwater Foundation, will be doing is creating a platform in which then a public has in which a public comes in order to activate the work. And without the public, the work would be even less modest. It would be quiet and mute. It would be a mute sculpture, right? So I like this notion of work that continues to, in a sense, produce the work. I think Mel's project involves a great deal amount of work as well,
Collective action.
Well, the work, there's the physical work of building and making an installation.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the work to gauge the installation and the art and on a critical level. So it creates that option for the other invisible things, the resistance to transformation. So complicit in creating the environment that we have to exist in. I won't say we have to exist. The existence is almost unbearable every time it rears its head. So what I'm saying is that it is the physical structures, it is the conceptual structures that need to be tweaked to find out how to even create through our actions the possibility to re-engineer the desire for someone maybe who is politically predisposed to no action to really finally consider it. So it's almost like the climate you build for change is a climate that has to be nurtured for someone to be able to exist in it. In other words, how to get the ones who have always said no, that has put us into this position to even consider yes. So maybe the in-between state, this interstitial, did I say that right? That's the area. That's the area that it's like, it's almost like I talk about viruses too. Like they're necessarily incomplete. They complete themselves with this relationship to the host and to replicate. So if we could take the negative connotations out and put ideas, these actions as incomplete, and they need these hosts. And these hosts are some of the things that are not great hosts. Our country is not a great host to what we need to do.
So related to both of these, I've faced many questions where people say, what are you? Are you an artist? Are you an architect? Are you a designer? Are you a farmer? And I was like, first, why does it matter? I'd rather just take the lens of solutionary from like Grace Lee Boggs, Jimmy Boggs, and all the folks in Detroit that are doing the work, right? But I found it interesting because people get stuck on, I'll be polite, they just get stuck because they see real estate as one way. Because it becomes a formula of reification of values that come to a common denominator of just dollars, and they negate the spaces of humanity. They negate the ecology of the place. They negate all this other, and then it renders it zero and invisible. Whereas the thing that we know that actually makes these places alive and sustainable is the collective agency, the butterflies, the pollinators, the food, the soil, and everything. But we have a whole. And another thing of the readings, there's a metabolic rift that is afoot. Metabolic rift is an ecological critique of capitalism, where it's like, yeah, you just extract and extract and extract from nature until you just get a whole. And then what have you done? You've exploited the work that was there, the humans that were there, the nature that was there, and you just say, oh, I'm up, I'm going to the next place and do the same thing. And you just sinkholes left everywhere. So who's left to heal those holes? Well, the people that are either stuck there or nature. So what's interesting about rethinking real estate through this lens is that for generations, there has been a kind of a narrow, myopic way of looking at development and looking at what a building is. So what I really appreciate, or what is the absence of a building? It's there's a vacant lot. It's blight. It's nothing. There's no life there. Bullshit. Mm-hmm. So,
it takes rethinking what even this term art is. Just maybe it's not. In other words, it's probably more important to forget those terms.
It is.
And recreate terms, or like I like to think about actions within the public as catalytic structures. They set the possibility for something to happen.
So this is what I appreciated, because the installations that we're both talking about, the well and the safe house, to take an iconic image of a thing that people associate in one way and to actually install them either in a public space or on a church, just the safe on a church is such an expressive concept that people are like, what am I looking at? And it creates a space of activation. And again, going back to that neuroplasticity, it just the neuroplasticity just starts to tingle. You're like, wait, I'm not sure what I'm looking at, but because it's rooted at a place with people that we see every day, that we know, that we trust, it becomes welcome and embraced to see a well on a space that used to be a vacant lot for 20 years, directly adjacent to a space that now we're creating a socially distant marketplace around food and water and access and information as a public art. There's this new beginning and a new story that is happening, but it takes a certain type of art installation, an appreciation of the existing kind of structures of consciousness, the shells of the remains of what used to be there, and a translation that has actually rooted in place. It takes that really, really, really beautiful new thing to cause people to convene.
So you gotta trip them out, and I can't wait to taste the water. I think it's also even taking what's known.
I promise you, it will be sweet water.
Oh, you know it.
But Mel, since you brought up the question of the institution, I just want to say, we've done the museums. Museums have done some work, to kind of acknowledge themselves as being spaces that are not value free, right? This kind of fallacy of the museum as a space that doesn't carry, very specific meanings. We've done some work in the last 30 years to think about that, but institutions have trouble being brave. So this project, and I've been grateful to the three of you to be able to use this project as a way to push that and lean into that. And the SMART, has come along with us on that journey, and they were on that journey themselves when we started doing this, to think about what can an art institution, a museum, do differently? What do we have to do differently? How do we become good neighbors as opposed to spaces that don't feel inclusive? We're trying to be attentive, as you all are, to the question of place and what different places mean. And somebody, apparently this has become a question in the on the chat as well. So thinking, how do we all think about context? And the question is specifically, as someone who has only visited Chicago, how does the context of place inform these projects specifically?
I mean, one just has to go, again, I said 2.1 miles. If you go just from one neighborhood to the next, you'll see worlds of difference. I mean, it's so apparent in the landscape where choices of investment and disinvestment are. It also, when you go just look at the redlining maps, you look at the history, you look at the text, you look at the narrative, and the place. Chicago was designed, it's known for being designed through racism and segregation. It's just known for that. So it's also known for being a space for the Great Migration. It has this deep history that goes back and bridges to the South, and it bridges the urban-rural divide. We're just known for that, and you can feel it when you come to a place like Sweetwater, or just you feel it when you come to or talk to people. I mean, the best thing is when here you can just talk to people, if that addresses the question at all.
Well, I think also, just the idea of place and how you make place. There's many, many, many ways that this can happen. For example, when you make a farm, right? And then in it, you put a barn. You make a place. You make a place. But then when you call that the thought barn, you actually make a different place. It is a place for thought, right? Thought and action. And I know that Sweetwater is really invested in how to name things. And the naming also makes places, And so, like, the well, in a sense, is an object, but the well is a place, I mean, historically, the well right, has been a site in which people have congregated. So whether it's a town well or an oasis, it becomes a place by making the thing, as opposed to that a place is just space, right? Where do we go from space to placemaking, right? And then where do we go from placemaking to the commons, right? To a shared space, to a built space for something larger than a kind of individual sort of occupation, right? So
that word place is just strange to me sometimes. I mean, there's so much of this placemaking talk.
Yep.
What do you mean? Place? What's your place in society? Maybe.
Yep.
What's your place? Mm-hmm. What's your place? Maybe be projective. This is the place that actually did something to transform a condition that is rampant in all cities. Maybe this is the place that got it together, that had a unified voice, that did something through this unification, that cut through some of the divisional aspects. And this is the place that made that place heard. That place of inequity and poison, basically. We talk about lead poisoning. This is a place that changed the things. And it may be like the projects we do, Bill for Ill may be the project that does that. That may be placed that way in the future, where you forget about the artist. You should forget about the artist. You should forget about what all is done. And that everybody, whether you're in the south side of Chicago or the north side of Chicago, you can actually walk out of a house and be born in a place, and you're not poisoned by lead. You don't have to be threatened by this physiological effect that throws down on you and creates a situation where your place in society is compromised from the beginning. So I don't know. It's fun to look at these terms and turn them around.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting for placemaking to me is colonial.
Yeah.
You discovered that place. You discover why? Because the space is available, or there's a history of culture that you can then capitalize and monetize in order to build again. Like, that's colonial. You cannot talk about placemaking if you don't talk about displacement. Right? And I feel like a lot of times in the art world, they don't talk about the actual root causes of displacement and who's affected and the traumas of it. And then there's often a violent act of tearing stuff down in order to build back up. That is it's just over the top acts of violence that's already plagued on places of trauma and the memory of trauma and the loss. So with respect to that, when we think of blight that permeates through the real estate development world, or the narrative of urban renewal and this and that, blight is like actually from paleontology and the study of plants. It's the death and decay of a crop so that it no longer sustains life. A lot of times it's because of stuff affiliated with water in the soil, right? It was interesting is rethinking these terms, creating a challenge to the terms to create new memories and places of play, new places of memory, and new types of installation that increase our precarity. So, and this is another book. So the mushroom at the end of the world, the possibility of life in capitalist ruins is all very relevant. In chapter 1 is the arts of noticing. And she talks about the issue of precarity. And I can't tell you how deep state of we're in such a precarious state right now. But there's two different ways of you can look at precarity. You can be paranoid and complete fear of precarity and vulnerability, or you can actually start to embrace that invulnerability and look for new ways to depend on interdependencies. Like this relationship right now is an interdependency. Like we don't really fully know each other yet. We've been creating a bond over the past, year. We're probably going to continue that for like a long time. But it is an interdependency on our separate relations that create these new assemblages. Because the installation of the well it's an assemblage that's going in to heal. The prosthetic of the safe going onto a church is something to activate that space as an assemblage, but it's collectively making the place through the people. and the mixing of people who don't normally mix because we're told we're not supposed to mix. But we know that's the right thing to do by humanity.
Yeah, I remember going back to that question of how we came to Sweetwater, and I remember the first day when we met, we had a conversation about fungus. You know? So I'm glad you bring it up again, and we talked about mycelia, right? Yep. Again, something that is submerged beneath the soil that we don't necessarily see, that becomes a network of communication between organisms. And we talked about the fragility of that and the ephemerality of that and so forth. And the networks that mycelia represent. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up mushrooms again, because that was part of our first conversation now.
Mushrooms and slime mold.
As I don't want to interrupt the flow here, but we have to either stop talking or do another station ID. So I just want to give us a pause for a second, but also to say that we should talk about for a minute how people can get involved, because they were talking about projects that are interactive. So if you want to mention that here, now might be a good time.
We're stopping for the break.
Let's do a quick station ID. You're listening to 105.5 WLPN Chicago. You can listen on lumpenradio.com or on the Android or Apple apps as well. We've been having a conversation between MacArthur Fellows Mel Chin and Iñigo Manglano-Ovalle with Emmanuel Pratt of Sweetwater Foundation and Abigail Winograd of the Smart Museum. We're going to continue on to hear a little bit about how you can get involved in their projects. Thank you.
That's a really interesting question for me, because every time that I do a well, one of the interesting aspects of a well is that legally a well sort of transfers its ownership immediately to this place or the community or to the owner. And so for me in the well, once it's at Sweetwater, right, access or involvement with the well, once it's up and running, is something that transfers, right, from whatever the artist intended to now the owner or the community, And so this is a conversation that I know is going to be ongoing between us when we're working with Sweetwater, and in a sense, the notion of even authorship and ownership transfers, right? So, access to the well, what happens to the water, how will community access it, who access it, when they access it, really is transferred, right, to Sweetwater Foundation, because in a very real sense, the artwork is existing already within an existing site, right?
What I think will be interesting about just the well on that site is that, again, it does bring up a lot of questions, and it also brings up deep, rich history. So we're actually looking for folks that are into those histories or historiographies. We're looking for folks that know a little bit about the research and histories of wells and mechanics of how stuff works historically. The evolution of infrastructure throughout Chicago. We've been looking at ways, land and land use. There's an interesting thing in James C. Scott's Seeing Like a State, where he talks about use of fructuary, and it's a useful for fruitful production of land. There's precedents around the world of that, but it'd be great to have the public bring that to this. It'd be great to say, hey, come to our socially distanced public marketplace and have some kind of future workshop where we don't know when, we don't know how, but we'd like to do these kind of workshops. And now that we're dealing with this Twitch, Zoom, Google Meet hack thing of new publics that are online and interpersonal, we would love to know how to get water test kits that we can share with our various publics, and how to support the knowledge that's generated from the publics that are actually activating the well. Same thing, it goes right over to the safe house, right? Mm-hmm. Having that go over to our civic art church with this safe house and Fundred, and then creating support and human infrastructure, but ultimately new forms of physical infrastructure that we can have more people engaged in this conversation. Because right now, we don't know how to let people engage safely, realistically, right? We're rooted in a neighborhood that has a spontaneity of reality, of organicity, of public. But then all of our work is public, but then we have to be like, wait, hold on, don't just show up here, please, right? Because that's not helpful. So we're rethinking all that. As I say, we're rethinking it, but we're thinking of new forms of engagement, new forms of public. And eventually we'll have a public art installation and show and stuff like that.
Yeah. We talk a lot of... Go ahead, Mel.
Well, the Fundred project is, you can do it right now. If you go to fundred.org and download a template. The Fundred project is nothing by me. It's by you. It's by the people of America. It's by the people of Chicago. That's what was invented to be that. The project was invented that immediately the expression has value, and it's up to us. It's up to you first to decide if you want to donate your expression, and if you donate, then we are obligated to deliver it in a fashion in the exhibition, of course, but then to take your representation of your value to your congressional leader, to put them in front of the acts that they've already started to voice, especially the Lead Safe Housing for Kids Act, and say, okay, well, you have a public voice here, represented individually by one person, by one child. I know that 8-year-old can't vote yet, but right now he or she is in a position of being poisoned by lead, but the very house that they live in. So that's what the reality is. I think that you could look that up. I know that through the SMART and through Sweetwater and through all of us, we'll be we'll be bringing the templates. We'll be inviting people to do it. You could do it. All you need is a pencil and paper and a will to express yourself in a unified way. So we're going to start. We've already started with some passing out some templates, and we will continue with the good grace of Smart Museum and everybody.
I was also going to say there's definitely ways to show support just through either donations for any aspect of this. I mean, there's so many different networks of people right now that are just hurting. And we have a series of value-based partners that we have people right now that are facing evictions. Like, no one's talking about how evictions are the next wave of slaughter of humanity. So doing something like this as an art project is cool, but it's a much deeper meaning here in the neighborhoods that we're doing this work. So money's always appreciated. Social capital, human capital, and political capital are really what we're talking about. Because one reason why these holes exist is because of lack of political will. Mm-hmm. Because the political capital here, money is part of it, sure, but actually raising and lifting up voice and support. And when we get to these critical issues that might very well have so-and-so from another decade that was the root cause of the issue, I don't want to talk about, it's not my fault. We're suffering right now. So what are we collectively doing about it? So we're going to be calling on people for action, for political support, for just honest human support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned too, in regards to the well, we are already looking for expertise too. Knowledge is a form of capital support. Knowledge that can be shared.
Yep.
So we're looking at trying to find interesting ways to re-engineer a filtration system, to re-engineer reverse osmosis, to guarantee that the water that we provide is safe and filtered, and maybe perhaps developing or re-engineering something that can be dispersed out there to other communities. Once the well is up, I think it does become a platform, a place. We've been talking about ideas of creating adjacent to the well what's known as a water table, a place for discussion, a place for discussion on a series of issues, whether they are about water, whether they are about history of the site. I would like to see somebody come in and do a workshop on just what this site was, even before we all arrived. Where was water? Where was water? What's the history of this particular site? And then you take that history and watch it develop, up into the current moment.
We've got to wrap up, guys. So I want to thank all three of you for taking the time. I know that we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure that we will in the future. But at the moment, I just want to thank the three of you and for Lumpen Radio for hosting us, and all of you out there who are listening. And see you soon.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Stay well.